Hello, hello, it's Mr. Grow, and today we're talking about the Korean War. So, this is often referred to as the Forgotten War, and sometimes I forget that it's referred to as the Forgotten War because I think about this war all the time, but I'm also a nerd. This is called the Forgotten War because it just didn't receive much attention from the media. This wasn't like World War II where everyone was super on board and there was newsreels and it was like, yeah, let's go get them. But it also wasn't like Vietnam, where there was massive protests and big anti-war movements or anything like that. It was just sort of there. And part of this is because the stakes were a little bit lower than what they were in World War II, at least for the United States. And another part of that is because TVs weren't very popular yet, and that meant that there wasn't really a good way for a lot of Americans to be super informed about the Korean War. So I'm going to start off by reading you this quote. "If we let Korea down," President Harry Truman said, "the Soviets will keep right on going and swallow up one place after another." So why am I starting off with this quote before any sort of background knowledge or anything like that? Well, I'm starting off with this quote because I feel like it embodies the feeling, the goal of containment very well. And the Korean War was a symptom of Truman's containment policy. It was the entire reason that we needed to get involved, because we didn't want communism to spread. Okay, now let's jump into background knowledge. So, Japan had control of the Korean Peninsula since about 1910, and that obviously changed at the end of World War II. Russia occupied the northern half of Korea, and the US occupied the southern half. The two superpowers then agreed to hold on to their claims for 5 years and then let them go. This was not a popular idea among Koreans, any of them, north or south, which is understandable. You really wouldn't want a superpower babysitting you all day long. I get that. So elections were held sooner than that 5-year period. A general election was held in the south, and a parliamentary election was held in the north. In the south, President Syngman Rhee was elected in 1948, July 20th of 1948, and at about the same time, Kim Il-sung was installed in the north. The US and the USSR then withdrew from Korea. And then it was happily ever after. Everyone was good to go, the superpowers went home, the Koreas lived in harmony, and that was it. Oh. Nothing good seems to last. Communist insurrections had been plaguing South Korea for most of 1949, and it had weakened the South Korean military and lowered the support for its government. Mao Zedong had been victorious in China in the Communist Revolution, and now the PRC, the People's Republic of China, was the big bad guy in Asia, or at least according to US foreign policy. What's more is that Korean units of the Chinese military were sent back to North Korea armed with weapons and armed with battle experience. Also in 1949, Russia detonated their first nuclear weapon. This was a really big deal, as I'm sure you understand, because this meant that the United States no longer had a nuclear monopoly. They were not the only people in town with nuclear weapons, and so we really couldn't bully Russia around anymore. So, knowing that the South Korean military was weakened, and knowing that China was good to go, and knowing that they had the nuclear weapons, the USSR gave the green light to North Korea to start an invasion against South Korea. There were just two conditions, though. Mao had to commit to providing reinforcements if needed, and Stalin made it abundantly clear that Soviet troops would not be participating. He didn't want to risk that. He didn't want to directly fight with the United States because that could quickly spin into World War III, and even Stalin didn't want that. Meanwhile, US and UN intelligence thought an attack was unlikely. Who could have seen this coming? It's unclear who fired the first shots, but it is clear that North Korea was looking for any reason to attack. And attack they did. Within 3 days, Seoul had fallen, and the Hangang Bridge, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, Hangang. The Hangang Bridge was blown up to stop North Korean forces from advancing. It was detonated with 4,000 civilians still crossing it, and as a result, hundreds of them died. And unfortunately, their deaths were in vain. It really didn't even make a difference. The North Korean military far outnumbered and outgunned the South Korean military, and in just 5 days, South Korea lost 70,000 troops. So at this point, America had to make a decision. But what? Right? Do we just go ahead and get involved? What if it spirals into a world war? We don't want that. What if the attack on Korea is a diversion? Is Stalin trying to distract us so we can go start some shenanigans in Eastern Europe? We don't know. If the US does nothing, will Japan fall next? According to domino theory, that's what's going to happen. So what do? Well, we go to war. I'm doing air quotations, you can't see me. But yeah, we go to war. So the US chose to provide military assistance, but Congress did not declare war. This was the first time that this happened. And it was Truman who called for military action, and he secured $12 billion in funding from Congress to do so. So Congress was providing the money to do it, but there was no formal declaration of war. And this is important because this is pretty much, actually this is how the US has handled military action since then. We have not declared a war since World War II. Truman, reflecting on this course of action, said, "Communism was acting in Korea just as Hitler, Mussolini, and the Japanese had 10, 15, and 20 years earlier. I felt certain that if South Korea was allowed to fall, communist leaders would be emboldened to override nations closer to our own shores. If the communists were permitted to force their way into the Republic of Korea without opposition from the free world, no small nation would have the courage to resist threat and aggression by stronger communist neighbors." Guys, that is domino theory right there. Right? Truman thought that if South Korea fell, it would open the door to more countries falling, and specifically ones close to us, like he mentioned. Okay, so how did this war play out? Well, in front of you, you're seeing what happened right after World War II, right? So you have the USSR in North Korea, the US and South Korea divided at the 38th parallel. And right here, they're setting up their own individual governments right now, 1947. Things are going all right. Okay. And stuff's about to get wacky right now. Okay, so North Korea has started the invasion. Look at how quickly they move into South Korea. Look at how fast they push to the Pusan perimeters, that little smidge right at the bottom right there of green. Okay, so here comes the United States. Look at that, boom. All the way up to the Yalu River. That's the border between Korea and China. And it's going great. Nothing could go wrong. We're gonna win. Uh-oh. So I guess now would be a good time to talk about General MacArthur. You see, he swore up and down that China would not enter the war. Well, he was proven horribly wrong, as you just saw right there, when 300,000 Chinese troops attacked in 1950. That was that big pushback from the Yalu River. And it wasn't just that inaccurate prediction that started to tarnish General MacArthur's reputation, at least to Truman. You see, MacArthur did not like Truman's limited war policy. Like I mentioned before, this was an unusual tactic for the US, who previously fought with goals of unconditional surrender. And there are rumors that MacArthur wanted to use nuclear weapons in the Korean War, but that's largely unsubstantiated, that there's no real proof behind that. But he did publicly and loudly criticize Truman, and Truman couldn't tolerate that, so he fired MacArthur when that started to blow up. Okay, so going back to the video, I have it paused right now. You see that little green dot way up there in the north part? Well, that is the Frozen Chosen. Who, you might ask? These guys. So this is the Frozen Chosen, and no, that's not a spelling error. It's named after the Chosin Reservoir in South Korea. It's actually spelled a little bit differently than that, but this is just how it's spelled now. But it happened in the absolutely brutal winter of 1950. Like, it was so cold that rifles froze, exposed skin froze, canned food had to be eaten like popsicles, like they had to eat, bean popsicles. And so the 1st Marine Division was outnumbered by Chinese forces 35-1. Pilots reported that the hills looked alive with Chinese troops. And of course, the 1st Marine Division stood no chance, so they had to retreat all the way back to that little green dot that I showed you. And they were stuck there for quite a while. So there's a lot of horror stories to come out of here, but I found this one particularly haunting. Plasma froze, and the medics had to warm syrups of morphine in their mouths before they could use them. Wounds froze, and Private First Class Leroy Hinsta saw a Marine stagger towards an aid tent. His lower jaw was missing. All he had was frozen red icicles on his face, Hinsta said. A corpsman came over, told the wounded Marine that there was nothing he could do, and that when he thawed, he would die. He then handed him a pencil and a piece of paper and told him to write a letter home. I mean, this has to be one of the worst ways to go, right? Knowing that you are going to die as soon as you thaw. What would you do? What would you write on that letter? I don't know. It just sounds terrible, and it's a terrible reminder that this forgotten war was still very much a war. And going back to our map here, you can see they're going to push us all the way back to that 38th parallel, give or take. We start to lose a little bit of ground, and then we push them back a little bit, and largely the lines stay kind of where they are right there for the duration of the war. And yeah, that stalemate went on for about the next 2 years until the armistice was signed. So Stalin was dead. He died in March of 1953. And Eisenhower was now in office. He was inaugurated in January of 1953. And the ceasefire was called on July 27th of that year. And while the fighting stopped, there was a catch, right? The war never technically ended. They're still in the state of armistice. There is a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, that runs along the 38th parallel. And North Korea has expressed many times that it would love to nuke South Korea. So there are still issues that need to be worked out here. Something interesting I want to point out here is that look at the North Korean guards on the left picture, the bottom left picture. They look like they're still wearing gear from the Cold War era. I don't know if it actually is old or if it's just styled to look old, but it's interesting to note that they're hanging on to that aesthetic. Anyways, though, peace talks were renewed in 2018, and they're still ongoing, but they're rocky. North Korea is very reluctant to denuclearize, although it should be noted that for the first time ever, a U.S. president has met with the leader of North Korea. In this case, it was Kim Jong-un. And though there wasn't a lot that was actually accomplished at this meeting, it was still a step in the right direction. So who knows what the future could hold? We could see one unified Korea within our lifetimes. In fact, the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, actually called Kim Jong-un, it was a letter that he sent to Kim Jong-un about COVID-19 and condolences and intent to support each other. So there is a relationship there. Hopefully we can see an end to the tensions and a unified Korea. Alright, so that is our video on the Korean War. Hopefully you don't forget what you learned about the forgotten war. Oh, I crack myself up. Okay, it's the end of the video. Bye.